Hello. Today we are going to look at ERD diagram and entities. Remember, after we have corrected the database requirements, now we are going to visualize those requirements in ERD diagram. This is a visual representation. From our last videos, you can check the link below. Our main objective for our lead word application was employee benefits, communicating employee benefit for the employee. So here we are going to construct an employee benefit tracking database, and later maybe we can construct an employee benefit management system. Remember, we are solving the common database problems, whereby we can find a way to solve these things or to address these common database problems. So let us begin. From our last videos, we had some naming of entities and attributes. We extracted some. So we reviewed our entities and attributes. Here we came with 6 of them after refining our last list of entities and attributes. We have an employee and the benefit which he or she is going to get. We have the enrollment and the provider who is going to give the benefit, feedback for scores and recommendations, and then we have dependent, which means this is the one who can inherit. So from here we are going to extract the attributes of these entities one by one. Starting from employee, we extracted this, whereby we have employee ID, which is going to be a primary key when we will do the mapping in the next step. We have the full name, which contains the first and last name. We have the contact address, which is email, and maybe phone. We have date of birth, hire date, and age, and maybe the department where the employee belongs. Next attribute, we have the benefit. We will have our primary key as a benefit ID. Then we will have the benefit type and the name. Lastly, we will have this is a foreign key, let's say from the provider table. Next attribute is the provider, whereby our primary key will be the provider ID. Then we will have the name, phone, and the email address. The next attribute will be enrollment. Here we will have our primary key as enrollment ID. We will have the date, status, and amount contribution. We will have another attribute which is dependent. We say this is like a will. Employee can have someone who will inherit the benefit. Let's say it will be a child or a spouse. So under this attribute, under this entity, we will have the following attributes: dependent ID, which is a primary key, full name, date of birth, gender, and relationship. So a point to note here when naming these entities and attributes, we should be as brief as possible, not to obscure the meaning of the names. That's why you have seen I've used dependent ID instead of just highlighting or noting ID, because at the end of the day, if we use ID, then we use under enrollment we use ID, then again in the provider we have ID, you see we will have the same names. And under naming configuration of ERD diagram, it is not recommended. So it is recommended to have different names. That's why I've added some prefix to avoid confusions. Like for example, I can use the entity name as a suffix provider, then I add ID in front. So quickly, let us move to our ERD diagram. Here we need to extract the key entities and attributes. As I said, these steps are iterative. We can review, we can add, we can remove as time allows. So further, we need to identify the relationship between the listed entities. Remember, these two entities are linked together by a relationship. So in relationship, we have two types. We have maximum cardinality and minimum cardinality. Minimum cardinality we refer it as participation. So under maximum cardinality, we have employee entity and enrollment entity. We have a one-to-many. This means we can have one employee under multiple enrollments. Benefits and enrollment. Here we have a one-to-many relationship. Here it means you can have one benefit and under multiple enrollments. Provider and benefit entities. Here we have a one-to-many relationship, which means one provider can have one benefit. So lastly, we have a relationship between employee, entity, and dependent. Here it is a unique example, in such that we have a M-to-N relationship. Here it means man-to-many relationship. Multiple employees can have multiple dependents. So from here, we are going to list each employee. So the attributes which we have extracted, we are going to represent it or to visualize using our free source software, which is draw.io. So to make work easier, I just split the task into subtasks. I divided it into each entities, then at the end we combine using the relationship and we come up with the employee benefit tracking database ERD diagram. So beginning from employee entity, we have employee entity represented enclosed in a rectangle. We have employee ID, which is the primary key, is underlined, so it will be the primary key of the table. So the other attributes are listed in the oval shape. Under full name, we will have the first name and the last name. Sorry for the confusion. So as you can see, we have added some prefix here: emp, full name, emp, hire date, at least not to obscure the meaning. Number 2, we have ERD diagram for enrollment. Here we have enrollment as entity enclosed in a rectangle. It is identified by the enrollment ID, which is the primary key. It is underlined. Then the other attributes: enrollment date, enroll status, and the enroll contribution are the other attributes. Under benefit, we have benefit entity enclosed in a rectangle. It is identified by benefit ID, which is the primary key. We have the benefit name and the type. Next, we have the provider. Provider is the entity which is enclosed in a rectangle. It is identified by the primary key, which is the provider ID. It is unrhymed. The other secondary attributes are here: provider name, flow email, and the flow. Okay, this is a confusion. So we have pro email, provider name, and we have pro phone. So these are multi-valued attribute. That's why it has double offers. Next, we have the dependent. Here we have the dependent enclosed in a rectangle. It is identified by dependent ID, and the other attributes are listed in the hover shape. So we have the email, gender, date of birth, relationship, full name, which is first name and last name. As I've said, I used draw.io to represent this ERD diagram. So the employee benefit tracking database ERD diagram is here combined using the relationship. So we have under maximum cardinality, we have one to many enrollments, which is one mandatory to many optional. Here we have relationship enrolls. Under enrollment and the benefit entities, we have a relationship benefit, whereby we have one mandatory and many optional. Under benefit and the provider, we have provides relationship. Here we have a one mandatory to many optional. Lastly, we have dependent and employee. Here we have a unique relationship, whereby we have a man-to-man relationship. We have men mandatory to men optional. So we have a men depends. We have depends relationship. But so when we are going to, the difference will be seen when we are going to do the mapping. You will see under the man-to-man relationship, we will have another table which will link the two tables. So that is the end. So the next lesson or video, we are going to convert this ERD diagram or into relational tables, what we call relational mapping. Now we will convert this into relational table. We will also we will use the same method which we have used here. We will just detect that single entity, we convert to table, we go to the next, then we combine those tables into one relational mapper, or what we call now the employee benefit tracking database relational tables. So from there, we detect that those tables, then we come up with SQL statements. This SQL statement, we will have queries whereby we will create virtual data, we insert into a database, then we can query. Later we can come up with employee benefit managing systems, whereby we can construct or we come up with a user interface. We can use frameworks, which is frameworks that are there, like we have for front end, we can have Express.js, you have the HTML, CSS, and the backend we can have the Node.js and our database MySQL. And that is the end. Thank you and welcome back.